Welcome everyone to the September 2022 textual study on the Bible and Beyond discussions. I'm your host, Shirley Paulson, and our presenter this evening is Dr. Hal Taussig. In this study, we'll be talking about dealing under the table, ritual negotiation of women's power in early Christ people's Gospels. Taking a look at the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Thomas, we'll look at how the gender controversy touched on both. In both cases, there is significant controversy between them, but we could also point to serious and good conversation too. I want to mention, before we turn it over to Hal, that we encourage and appreciate an ongoing pledge of support via Patreon. We hope that those of you who are already supporting us through Patreon are also enjoying the special videos that we've created for you. If you're not yet signed up, please go to patreon.com, Bible and Beyond, to make a pledge, a monthly pledge that's just right for you. PayPal or checks are also appreciated, but we're only able to make those little extras available through Patreon. Thank you so much, and Hal, it's all yours. Can't wait to hear what you've got to say tonight.
Thanks so much, Shirley, for being here with me, and thank you all for coming. I'm very excited about this evening in terms of trying to think more complexly about the way that communities and particular people, especially gender-wise, how people made their way in their life. And I'm wanting to think particularly about the roles of people at table. Now, at table is just a little bit of the wrong way to think about it, in that, as a number of you have heard from me before, that basically the main way that people got together in terms of the early Jesus people for the first 2 centuries was at a meal. The thing about saying table is just a little goofy, in that people, by and large, when they ate lying down or reclining. And these were people in groups of 10 to 20. And what we see there is that they took the form of eating that really basically all of the Mediterranean in the 1st and 2nd century did, that is, reclining. The question here then for this evening has a lot to do with how much men and women ate together and under what circumstances. What I want to say to you, first of all, is to say that it turns out that these kind of gatherings for 200 years of meals together, more or less every week, these were complexly powered. That is, in many cases throughout the Mediterranean, there were people in terms of gender that various genders ate together in this particular kind of reclining. On the other hand, from time to time, there were people who came together in which the women, by and large, in certain communities, had to stand or to sit. That is, the way one ate together as equals was everyone reclining. But there are some communities where that did not happen, and the way that women were shown to be not quite equal or not at all equal was either by being at the meal and standing the whole time or sitting the whole time. So again, nobody lies down in our day, right? To eat, or hardly anybody. But This was a way that many of the different peoples of the Mediterranean had done for quite some time, and that was to show yourself relaxed. And showing yourself relaxed and eating meant lying down as you ate. Many times, well, since you lie down in this setting, you basically have either straw or couches on which you lay, and the couches on which you laid um, uh, were sometimes for two people and sometimes for one person. And indeed, by and large, there were many people of the same gender who had basically a couch for two, according to gender. That is, two women would lie on the couch together, and two men would lie on another couch together. Or sometimes, no matter what the gender, you would be on one couch. That was also, of course, a demonstration of how relaxed you were. Now, what I want to suggest at the beginning of this conversation is that in these 200 years, by and large, you had a lot of real being together communally at these meals. There weren't any other places to do that, basically. But as I've said before, occasionally there would be a difference according to gender as to who had real relaxedness and who did not. But what was really amazing across all parts of the Mediterranean was that there were many places in which gender didn't matter as to how you relaxed together. That it was, by and large, all genders were together equally. And again, I've said there are some exceptions. This does not mean for us to say that all was completely a matter of equalities together. That is, what the title of my essay for tonight that I wrote, I guess, about 25 years ago, Dealing Under the Table, Ritual of Women's Power. That is meant to say that that how power came into these communities was quite complex. So dealing under the table means all the process of equality or not, or some equality or not, was very complexly put together in a very unstable situation. So here, the way I think about women's power in these settings of being together in community is ritual negotiation. That is, when you could be together more or less as the same with one another, that was ritually negotiated. And by ritually negotiated, I mean that when you were in the same room together, there was always a fighting across different kinds of people, not just gender, as to how much power you had in the room. So often it would be where you reclined in the room that showed how much power you had. So often then you would have women and men and other genders coming together, and everyone would be reclining in many of these groups, most of these groups, but sometimes actually the people in the circle of those reclining were in an order of who was supposed to have the most honor. Maybe not power, but at least honor. And what's really, for me, wonderful about this entire dimension of ritual negotiation and dealing under the table is that it's always in play, and there are so many places in the New Testament and beyond the New Testament where we have stories of exactly that going on. We're going to look at both of those, but two of those stories in a moment. But first, as usual, I want to ask basically if you have any protests, questions, or thoughts just about what I've laid out so far.
I might ask the first question, Hal. You said that there were the men, women, and other genders. Do you want to tell us what you mean by other genders at the table?
Sure. That's easy, much easier to say about the people of our day in certain cultures, isn't it? But what has been discovered over the last 20 to 30 years is that actually there were more than two genders then as well. And the fact for us thinking in the past or the present that there's only a binary way of thinking about gender, I want to suggest that it's fairly clear now that in the first 2 centuries of the Mediterranean, there were people who were more or less and different than just a man or just a woman. So in other words, I want to suggest, and we can have some good discussions this evening about whether you agree with that, but I would say there's plenty of texts now that we know that have much more than 2 genders. Other thoughts before we go into the 2 of these texts that you have about either, Shirley, your question or thought, or any other questions or thoughts or protests about this phenomenon of your worship in the ancient world. Your worship was reclining in groups of 10 to 20.
Well, I've always kind of wondered, now that I've understood that people are reclining to eat, how do you actually physically drink when you're lying down? I don't have a way of understanding how that happens.
Yeah. Well, I've not done it very well myself, but we have so many pictures of that time that I'm going to see if I can show it to you right
Okay.
now.
Okay.
It's sort of like this.
Okay.
And if you've got another person on the couch together, you're like this, probably lying in one another's, as they called it, bosom. And when you're drinking and eating, you're taking your hand and putting it in your mouth. And we think you'd choke on that. It turns out that a lot of people in humanity for a long time had done that, and they just learned to eat and drink a little bit differently than we know how.
Very helpful. Thank you. I'm wondering, how do you envision this? But now you get it better. Thank you for the demonstration.
Yeah, right. Well, let's jump in. If
could I interrupt to say?
Oh yeah, sure,
box,
Karen. I'd like to hear.
In the chat box, 2 questions. Do you think this was true of the reclining position in the Last Supper? And was this part of the Jewish tradition or something new for Christians, so to speak?
Thank you. Let me take both of those quickly. So basically, all of the Mediterranean ate that way. I mean, so that's from Spain to Syria, from Greece to Egypt. Now, one thing you have to say is that there are a lot of poor people that don't get to eat much at all and don't get to have the places to eat where they can recline comfortably. Yeah, so it's everywhere where people can eat. And what you, for instance, what you notice in the New Testament in some of those scenes is you have, for instance, you have people renting a room to eat in. And there you don't have couches by and large, but you have to bring in some straw and hay and sort of pretend that that's a real couch. And now, Karen, your other question was?
What we think of as the first communion, would they have been reclining?
Oh yeah. So the pictures of of reclining that we have are way later. We have a whole bunch of pictures of the people of that time, the Jesus people and others that are reclining. It's just that we, in our foreignness, don't know that they're eating and drinking. And yes, then for when we think of the Last Supper being bodied like we are today, we're simply being in our own little world. And they were in a different world than that. So yes, it's I want to say it's completely clear in that time that all communions, all gatherings together to eat and talk and pray and sing and drink, all of those are reclining. And that's because that's the way people learned to do it in all parts of the Mediterranean. Okay, so let's tell a story or two. Let's start with the Gospel of Mark in chapter 7. And this, I have to say that I know that a number of people who are Christian and the like basically hardly ever hear this story from Mark 7. And it has very clear underpinnings of eating together and healing. So this is one of the most stunning stories in the biblical Gospels because it's probably the most, how shall we say, prejudiced picture of Jesus that we have. And it's this way. There is a foreign woman who comes to Jesus and says, listen, my daughter's really sick, and could you please help her? And Jesus says, more or less, it's right on the money, I don't have time for dogs. I only have time for the real children. And what Jesus is, I want to say, some people may want to rethink this with me, and I'd welcome that. But the language here is quite clear. We know in the greater languaging of that time that people that are called dogs for two reasons. One is they're foreigners, and two is they're women. In the women part, you can just add the word be. If you want to understand calling women dogs, just use the be word. But Jesus then, in order, as Jesus is doing healing and all of that stuff, this foreign woman comes and says, please help my sick daughter. And he said, can't do it, just too busy with the children, and you are just dogs. Notice the complications here. We actually don't know whether Jesus is calling the woman a B word or a foreigner word, mainly because the dog word is an insult to both. Now, you remember, for those of you who are remembering Mark 7, you'll remember that the woman is on her feet, or at least in her head, way ahead of Jesus. And that basically has her saying, listen, dogs can at least drink under or eat under the table. In other words, this foreign woman doesn't take Jesus's insult even into account. She's simply wanting to help her daughter. And so she says, all right, if he's thinking that way, I just still want him to help my daughter. And then Jesus actually is caught with what he has done and changes his mind and says, I'll help your daughter. And she is helped and healed. So here's what I mean by dealing under the table and ritually negotiating your own power. In other words, so look at what has happened in this Syro-Phoenician woman to help her daughter get better. She actually just doesn't take on the insult that she's been given. She simply tries to argue Jesus into it and does so successfully. Okay, so it certainly has been written in many theological tomes that this is not Jesus really being prejudiced, but this is just a way of Jesus playing a trick on someone, or he has some other secret meaning to it. I want to suggest fairly strongly that no, this story is basically right on for the way that powerful men treat foreigners and women. And this time, this powerful woman, or excuse me, powerful man, has somebody that's a little smarter than him. So I'd love to have you have some other thoughts on that, or ask some questions about this, or have just a thought or two on your own.
Oh, hi, Hal.
Hi.
Was Jesus a foreigner in Tyre and Sidon? I always thought they kind of stayed away from there. So,
Yeah, that's
I never
a
thought
great
about
question.
that before until
That's
tonight.
a great question. This picture of Jesus is one who understands himself as a male member of God's Israel's people, God's people in Israel. That could have been, that is something that other people in other countries also use as slurs against women and foreigners. But yeah, this is, as far as I can tell, Jesus would have thought that anywhere, meaning I am the goodness that God gives me. And it looks like in this case, he thinks that that has to do, in part at least, with being a man and being a man or a person who is a part of the people of Israel.
Thank you.
Mhm. So I myself am probably more interested in getting us further along in this, but I do want to acknowledge that it seems like this story in Mark, and by the way, it's also in Matthew, with a few changes, that this is another Christology than the way many Christians have talked now and throughout the centuries. That is, that what you have here is a picture of Jesus who's prejudiced. So if anybody would like to think a little bit with me out loud out there before we go on to this, these next steps of thinking about dealing under the table and ritual negotiations of women's power.
I think it's also interesting to think of him as actually learning at the same time. Because
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that I didn't want. It's clear that in fact, this is one of the best stories of him learning. And it seems clear that he's done it. We know from other texts in and outside of the Gospel of Mark, we know that Jesus, for instance, when Jesus heals the woman with the flow of blood,
Right.
Jesus says, I didn't do that. You did it. You did it with your power.
Yeah. Carol, go ahead.
Actually, it seemed since they were in Tyre and Sidon or whatever, wasn't that also perhaps during the period where he was really being chased and persecuted by Pharisees and others? And so he is up in kind of a slightly foreign area where maybe he didn't also want to have too much attention, called to himself, there as well. I've also, although at first hearing it always seemed harsh, but since he does always give examples of something or analogies, it seemed somehow less harsh. And in each instance, he did always seem to respond to people who perhaps did the unorthodox, like touched the edges of his robe and things like that. When he realized the sincerity or the kind of acknowledged the special need or the readiness or whatever, that he did respond.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Exactly. I think that's a very important way to think as well about this. I don't think those are mutually exclusive. But what is really interesting for me in the positive way would be to say clearly that at least one could say he's having a bad day. That's kind of what I'm hearing from you, Carolyn, and all of those kind of things, I think actually make at least my relationship to Jesus stronger.
Okay, so Julia asks, wasn't that particular story not considered clearly authentic by the Jesus Seminar?
Oh, I'm a founding member of the Jesus Seminar. I can't remember what we voted on that. I'm really, I would have to go to a book that I don't have in front of me. But well, why don't you? If you can tell me, that would be great.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, hi, Julia.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, I looked it up one day and it was in black. not red or pink or gray.
Yeah,
I
right.
read that
Well,
book when the Jesus Seminar was here in Houston at Rice many years ago. And
yeah, right.
after the explanation of the voting with the beads and all of that. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you for. I not only did I not remember what we voted, I don't remember why we voted, but I do have all those books on my shelf. And I apologize for not having that right in my head. And I think
Yes,
Shirley, you
Margie,
had somebody else.
Margie has her hands up. Go ahead, Margie.
Hi, I'm going to turn on my camera. I have no idea how I'm going to show up on here. So I was thinking about Jesus' parable of the woman who went to a neighbor to ask for something. Well, actually, there's somebody who asked for bread. I think that may have been a man who was having a visitor. But anyway, he talked about importunity, that consistently sticking with your requests made it be answered. And so this was kind of a sense where this was forcing her to be very persistent.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to say is, regardless of what the Jesus Seminar voted,
Yes, right.
was not a founding member. Have never read anyway. I think it's always interesting that there are lessons to be learned, whether a particular narrative is historical or not. It's part of what's so wonderful about the Bible, is that we can find something useful in virtually any narrative that's there.
Yeah, thank you, Margie.
Yeah.
That's certainly one of the ways I live most, that sometimes fiction is truer than fact.
Yeah.
In other words, that we often get the truth through fiction.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Thank you.
I don't know if you are ready to go on to the Gospel of Thomas, but Toto has a question here in the chat about the Gospel of Thomas connection here. Do you want to go to that now, or do you want to go a little farther with what
Well, let's see how that happened.
All right. So Toto, do you want to speak up for yourself, or do you want me to read for you? It says, it does seem inconsistent with the attitude with the Samaritan woman, Gospel of Thomas, but I don't doubt Jesus was capable of changing, learning.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we should go on to the Thomas story.
That's what I was wondering, if you're ready to do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
We can comparison here.
Yeah. So this is one of the we do, by the way, as you can fairly easily recall, we've got Jesus reclining a lot in various stories in the Bible. One of the coolest ones that I love is in the Gospel of John, where Jesus is reclining at this in the story of the Last Supper, and the follower of his that he loves most is in his bosom. So we have this, and one of these stories is from the Gospel of Thomas, with the basically the story of a woman named Salome. Now, Salome does occur in the regular New Testament occasionally, but doesn't get as much play as in Gospel of Thomas 61. And here we have this story, this tiny little story starts with Salome on her own couch. And so she's in the middle of the community, and what happens next is Jesus climbs up on her couch, and she says, "What are you doing here, mister?" That's actually a pretty good translation of that. In other words, why are you on my couch? And basically, Jesus and Salome then actually start talking about what it's like to be on the same couch together. And interestingly enough, unlike moderns and postmoderns, the first conversation is not about sex. Just because people are lying down together. In other words, in that setting, you have a lot of men and men, women and women, men and women, less so, reclining on the same couch, and the community is known as the Jesus people who spend the time praying, thinking together, talking, drinking, and having meals that last 2 or 3 hours. That's simply the way life is there. And it seems like then when Salome and Jesus start talking, they're talking almost as if, or I would say as if, what they are talking about is what is our relationship in terms of God and in terms of what we are trying to do together in this community. So in other words, if we can get outside our boxes as moderns and postmoderns, let's notice that this is a serious talk about who are we in God. And I'll read you a little bit more. And excuse me, Shirley, I said I wasn't going to do this, but I do want to quote this. Salome said, "Who are you, mister?" As though from the one, "You have come up on my couch and eaten from my table." Jesus said to her, "I am he who exists from the undivided. I was given some of the things of my Father." Now, listen to this. It's so cool as a real conversation. In other words, Jesus says, the first thing to say about me is that I am a person who is undivided. There's a unity to me. And then secondly, he says, I was given some of the things of my Father. And then Salome says, "I am your follower." And Jesus says to her, "Therefore I say, if he is undivided, he will be filled with light. But if anyone is divided, they will be filled with darkness." So I guess I would want to say that what we have here is a conversation between Salome and Jesus saying, who are we in God's sight? And Jesus is saying, I in God's sight, I have no divisions. And she says, yeah, that's kind of what we're working at, isn't it? And if we're not undivided like you are, we're in trouble. This is, by the way, Gospel of Thomas 61. So let's just take for a moment this first take on this. You probably worked with Gospel of Thomas 61 even less than the Syro-Phoenician woman in Mark 7. So let's see questions, thoughts, protests.
Well, I just want to say that I enjoyed Hal's remark that in regard to Jesus' change of direction with the Syro-Phoenician woman, that makes him identify with Jesus more, or whatever, how it was he said it. And it occurred to me as he was talking about that it's often brought out, Paul does it, that the Christ took form as Jesus in order to show us things we didn't understand before. And the biggie on that is, of course, that you can go through crucifixion and death and come out of it. And so he was showing us eternal life. But to recognize in that interchange with the Syro-Phoenician woman that perhaps he did have a prejudice, or at least not a totally enlightened thought about relationship with her. And so he was taking on the usual human form at that time, which was normal to be that way. But he showed us something in his quick response to her, showed us the right way to see the light and change and go in a better direction. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And let's stay with you just for a moment on her, if we can. If we're thinking about who is learning the most and who is in the place of being wise in that setting, I would want to agree with you really strongly that certainly Jesus is learning on the spot and it's resulted in a real healing. But if I have to stand back and say, now who is the person who's most together in this? That at least in this story,
It's the woman.
It's hands down the Syro-Phoenician woman.
Because it's perfectly natural for a woman and a mother to just keep at it. This is her one goal, is to help that child, and nothing else really matters. And so she just went right for the point. And the beautiful thing about Jesus' response to it is that he recognized so quickly the right way to go, whereas often in our usual human way, we just kind of rationalize it for a while, and it might take a couple months or years to come around to saying, hey, that really was right. She wasn't a B word.
No, she was not. Yeah, thanks. No, okay, and thank you so much for keeping us honor in both of these stories. Let's see if there's some people that want to take next steps on with Salome and Jesus on the couch.
Well, Grace is saying here too, again, I don't know if she means for both stories or not, but she says that I've always thought Jesus' message was for the world and not just for the Hebrew people.
Yeah, I think that if I had to say, Shirley, you brought us an additional question that I like. I would tend to say that Jesus's attitude in terms of all of the different people in the Mediterranean, that Jesus is probably a little bit more open-minded in the Gospel of Thomas than in the Gospel of Mark, and Mark's my favorite Gospel.
Okay, that's fair. I will mention that I want to make sure that everybody sees Ellie's message in the chat here relating to the five Gospels and the quotes attributed to Jesus.
That was just a note. I just looked it up here in the five Gospels, and my apologies for having my video on earlier when I didn't realize it. I hope I didn't do anything really disgusting.
No, you didn't. Don't worry.
All right. Anyway, I just I can't envision that story myself. I think it makes more sense that it happened and people remembered something than that it was constructed whole cloth, unless it was a story about somebody else that they appropriated and put in the gospel. That's just my thought about it. But I think a lot of the evaluations from decades ago need to be revisited if this is considered credible. But anyway, it only comments, the five gospels only comments on why the words of Jesus within that that story are considered black. It doesn't comment on the whole story or the justification for that. So
yeah, well, and as far as I'm concerned, we need to remember that in the Jesus seminar there was usually about 45 men to one woman. So when we're assessing that part,
you mean Karen?
Yes, I do. No, there were sometimes two. But thanks so much, Ellie, for having that there. I right now I'm at Rosh Hashanah dinner at my friend's house, and I'm taking a break from Rosh Hashanah to talk with you. So I didn't bring mine along. Anyway, okay. Let's see other thoughts on Salome and Jesus.
I'd like to know what you think it means to be divided or not divided. What does that mean?
I don't know.
Oh, hell.
I mean, I think it's a pretty straightforward word, and it. You may have seen that I used this the word united or unified, but I think that's for me that's one of the many places in the Gospel of Thomas that if we get a chance to read that story 40 more times, maybe we'll know more.
I love it.
But it does seem to me to be that both Jesus and Salome take the term for themselves and take the term as positive. And I think that there's no subtlety in those two people on the same couch thinking of themselves as undivided.
Yeah.
In other words, what if our way of our being is both bodily and spiritual at the same time, and who we are in the body and who we are in the spirit both have to do with can have to do with undividedness and connectedness. So here is I think where I want to again go back to the initial two phrases, dealing under the table, meaning. Notice in Salome and Jesus that this is a real give and take as a conversation. This is a give and take about a serious question about, in God's unitedness or undividedness, who are we? And Jesus leads with that, even after he's been challenged by Salome, and Salome just jumps right in to say, yeah, that's exactly right. Being undivided is a gift from God. And what is really, I think, extraordinary about this back and forth is the way they talk about Jesus as perhaps partly divine by saying he was given some of the things of God the Father. I've never really heard a gospel that talks about Jesus that way.
Yeah.
It is really thinking clearly about Jesus as some kind of divinity, but putting him in something like second or third place divinely, or maybe fifth. I don't know.
Sure, yes. Hi, I'm Bazal. Thanks for this gathering. I was just commenting that Salome is of the same root as Shalom, and the meaning of names in biblical stories don't seem to be accidental.
No, beautiful. I've been working on that text for 10 years and I didn't have that thought. Thank you. Just great. Then what I would want to say in these two stories is both of them are in the here and now, in give and take, in which what Jesus does and what the women do are basically talking straightforwardly together under very difficult circumstances. And so that's what I mean by ritually negotiating what one's power is in this time. That one of the things that happens when you lie around together, talking, drinking, thinking, and enjoying yourself, what happens in those cases is you relax into a deeper way of being together. And it's not, in this case, it seems to me that where the early Christ people in the first and second centuries learned the most was in this give and take-ness of lying around together and eating and talking together. That would be whether Jesus is in the room or not, and that one of the greatest things that happened in this larger phenomenon of having meals together all the time is that what is learned is, I guess, what in one case one might say 1 Corinthians 11 and 12, where it talks about the body of Christ. Now, the body of Christ is not in 1 Corinthians 11 and 12, is not something that is later Christology. It means that this body, that they're both 11 and 12 in 1 Corinthians are about people hanging out together in this fashion. And here you have that's what's called the body of Christ. In other words, it's not a single person. It's a deep unity of the human and the divine.
Wow, that's awesome, Hal. I want to say, I hope I'm not interrupting you, but Eric was able to respond by text chat, and I think it's so beautiful also. I wanted to share what he's saying.
Please.
He says, as someone who is frequently scattered, in quotes, but who responds to friendship with a sense of courage, heart, and wholeness, I am certain in some degree of what Jesus means about being undivided.
Oh, wonderful.
Eric.
And could you write us about 3 more paragraphs on that, Eric? Thank you so much. That's lovely. Let's see if there are any hanging questions or thoughts. Honor.
I just, your title is so, curious to me, because in our modern parlance, dealing under the table is not good. it means underhanded.
Mhm.
And yet, as you're developing this idea of first and second century Mediterranean society, it kind of seems to me to indicate that this under the table thing is like a deep current that's really going on. And whatever is on the surface of people eating and drinking is just what appears on the surface, but the really important stuff is what's going on underneath. Salome's and Jesus' conversation about having the single eye, if that's what they were talking about, and that sort of thing. What is it? Someplace in the Bible it says the things which are seen and the things which are not seen, and the things which are not seen are the more important.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for bringing that out. I enjoyed the idea.
Well, I wish I had more firsthand experience like the first 2 centuries had of having those kind of times together, both above board and under the table and in process.
Hal, I think we have to, a big round of applause for this. It's just beautiful the way you brought us together with a topic we know so little about and yet so thoughtful. I really appreciate your helping us with this. Oh, I see one more chat here from Eric. He's saying to read Alared's writings on spiritual friendship, I have an experiential sense that people with focused goodwill toward one another can have an exquisite and transformational exchange even at a glance. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
And we need to bring this to a close. I can't believe it. It has been just fascinating, Hal. I really appreciate your thinking about this. I'm glad you remember what you wrote 25 years ago and brought it to our attention now.
Thanks so much to you all. It's great to learn together.
All right, well, we'll bring it to a close here and just thanks everybody for your participation. This was the September 2022 textual study on the Bible and Beyond discussions on Dealing Under the Table, Ritual Negotiation of Women's Power in Early Christ People's Gospels, led by Dr. Hal Taussig. Once a month from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday nights, usually the 4th of the month, we provide a discussion of one or more of the early Christian texts. One of our knowledgeable scholars leads these sessions, sharing a well-framed overview of these early Christian texts and allowing participants time to ask questions and share their insights. We want to remind you that we do rely on your donations to be able to produce these textual studies. And we're so grateful to those of you who have already pledged your support via Patreon. If you haven't become a subscriber yet, go to patreon.com/Bible and Beyond to make a pledge that's just right for you. PayPal or check is also an option that we certainly appreciate. But please realize that we don't give you access to the extras we can provide on Patreon. So check the website, earlychristiantexts.com for details. And really, thank you so much.